Well, I feel a great sense of honor and gratitude to be here among so many amazing people. As I prepared for this conference, I was reflecting on my own journey and the shared story of our two great nations and imagining what lies ahead for all of us. I grew up in the mighty redwood forest on the coast of California, in the wilderness right around Fort Ross. I went to the teeny Fort Ross Elementary School for the first 9 years of my education. As a child playing make-believe in the woods, Fort Ross was an excellent place for the imagination. My friends and I would dart through to the trees, watch the seals swim in the sea, imagine firing the cannons at enemies. As I grew older, I learned more of the true history of the place. I learned that most of the gigantic trees were mere dwarves compared to what had been there when the Russians first landed. I learned that the seals in the water were a major part of why the fort had been built in the first place. And I learned that the cannons, though tested, though celebrated, were never actually fired in a true battle. I also learned more recent history of the U.S. and Russia. I learned how these large and powerful nations came together to fight and defeat the menace of fascism. I learned about the long season of mistrust and competition that followed that mid-century conflict. And although the Cold War ended when I was just learning to climb the trees and walk the trails around Fort Ross, we still, of course, see the reverberations of that today. So what then do we take from this complicated and contradictory legacy, and how do we build a better future upon it? For myself, I find hope in a similarity between my hometown of Fort Ross and our shared history. Atomic weapons are, in a way, the ultimate cannon. And yet, while the U.S. and Russia tested them and aimed them, we never actually fired them at each other. And in that way, perhaps one of the greatest legacies of Fort Ross is just the Russian restraint in never actually firing the cannons. Today, we face a new reality. I've come of age in a world that's no longer simply bipolar. It's more complex and filled with new challenges and challengers. If the first half of the last century was defined by the threat of terror, fascism, and the alliance of the U.S. and Russia saved the world from being consumed by that threat. And the second half was defined by our competition, and again, maybe our restraint saved the world. What are the perils that we face in the next 50 years? How can the U.S. and Russia once more play a leadership role? Our species has centuries of practice facing economic and military problems. The fortress many of us will visit later today is just one of the relics of the past, indicating how much effort people have put into building defenses and fortifications of threats in the past. But now we face different perils: economic, ecological. The threat of climate change, long dismissed as a future issue or a low, less immediate priority, now promises to fundamentally reshape our world, our global society, and the lives of every person on this planet in my lifetime. How do we build a fortress, a Izborsk or Fort Ross, can properly defend against these new threats? Properly responding to this peril will require more than just military might, more than just restraint. It will require innovation, education, vision, investment, leadership. And again, I look to the lessons of Fort Ross for hope, because Fort Ross is also a story of natural beauty, of the abundance of the natural world, and of people from very different cultures coming together for a common purpose. I've had the privilege of leading several student programs out in Fort Ross, programs focused on history and science, and outdoor leadership and survival skills. The best have been the international programs, where students from the U.S. and Russia learn side by side with young people from a dozen other nations, and we all relish the beauty and exuberance of the natural world. On the last trip I ran, there was a moment that stood out. I took our group of students from Russia, Turkey, Thailand, Kazakhstan, Brazil, China, the U.S., Honduras, many others, and I led them on a night hike. We walked in the moonlight, up a bluff, right by that beautiful ocean. And then the fog came in, it wrapped around us. Someone called for a ghost story. And I talked about how the museum around us, stories of the past, of the ghosts, that still define our world today. And the choices we make today determine whether we'll be the ghosts or the legends of the future. And perhaps it's because I grew up in that special place that I take it as a given that we can find hope in nature, that people work together in the wilderness, and that all the differences between us become very small when we're properly focused on survival. These are basic truths, but they're easy to forget in the complications of the adult life in the modern world. When I work with young people, I'm reminded of their importance and universality. So what's my hope and vision for Fort Ross? I see it not only as a museum dedicated to the past, but a learning destination focused on the future. I hope we will build a classroom, a school, that will bring together students from all over the world to appreciate each other and this planet we share. I've seen students from very different cultures come together faster and deeper in Fort Ross than anywhere else. In today's world, which is far too filled with localism and distrust, it's more important than ever that we focus and invest in our capacity to come together. Thank you.